The first part of a social psychology class is always going to be similar to the first part of a cognitive psychology class because we got to talk about cognition. We are, as the class goes on, going to focus more and more about cognition used in social situations. But you got to understand those basics of cognition before you go to cognition in social situations. So, what is cognition? Cognition is any mental activity that is processing a situation. So when we say social cognition, we're talking about mental activity that helps us understand the behavior of others and predict the behavior of others. Later in the class, we'll talk about how social cognition can help us control the behavior of others as well. If you understand it and predict it, you can control it. Going back to one of our tools of analysis in social psychology, and that is the functional perspective or looking at evolved tendencies, I think it's important to recognize that what most humans, not every human, because there's individual differences, but what most humans find really easy in understanding the behavior of others, understanding others' intentions, is extremely rare among animals. There are only a handful of animals that have any kind of advanced social cognition at all, and I think humans are probably the only ones that have social cognition as advanced as we have it. There are other primates that have some social cognition, some birds, a lot of aquatic mammals like whales have some of it, but ours is really so much more advanced than other species. This points to some kind of turn in our past where it was functional, it was adaptive for us to work together. And I think this is one of the things that differentiates humans from our primate ancestors and our primate cousins that are still alive today is that we cooperate in much larger groups than those other organisms do. You roll back the clock 10,000 years, and most humans are living in groups that are hundreds of humans cooperating together, sometimes networked together with thousands of other humans. That is unbelievable in the animal kingdom. Very few organisms can do that, except for things like ants, which are a eusocial species that don't have the individuality we have. So, why is this so rare? I'm talking about how amazing this is. What I'm trying to point out is that it's rare because it's costly. The human brain is just eaten up with all these programs for social cognition. It makes things easier for us, but takes up a lot of your brain processing. Your brain is very specialized for this, and it's really hard to do this stuff. Sometimes we don't notice how hard it is to understand the intentions of others because your brain does it so automatically. But connecting to the next thing I'm going to talk about, the accuracy versus efficiency, because it's such a difficult thing to do, we have to maintain a lot of shortcuts to keep it working smoothly. And so these shortcuts to make your brain more efficient are going to be a big focus of this lecture. What can social cognition do for us? What exactly is this benefit that made humans stand out against every other animal on the planet? Well, social cognition in part helps us refocus our behaviors to be more adaptive. For example, I'm presenting here some research from what was 2007. This is part of a group of studies that find that social exclusion changes the way your cognition works. It changes the way you see the world. The simplification of it is that when you feel like you are being socially excluded, it changes the way you see things and changes the way you do things to try to get you back into the group. So, for example, if you feel like you are ostracized, you feel like you're being excluded by others, you might automatically look for new social situations to try to get yourself back into the good graces of the group. So I want to think about the fact that behavior is a function of person variables and the situation. If we put you in the exact same situation 5 different times, but change your level of how socially excluded you're feeling, even if we put you in the same exact social setting, if you are feeling different levels of social exclusion, it can radically alter your behavior. So your behavior is always a function of person variables, what's going on inside you at any given moment, and the situation that you're in. So I'm going to repeat it again that social cognition involves shortcuts. You're going to hear a term a lot in this class and in the social psych setting, which are cognitive heuristics. Heuristics are information processing rules of thumb that they're brain shortcuts that enable you to do quick and easy judgments that are not guaranteed to be accurate but work a lot of the time. They're shortcuts. Cognitive heuristics are brain shortcuts. Now, I say that they're not always correct, but they're correct a large percentage of the time, so you keep using them. Your brain sacrifices some of the accuracy in order for efficiency. I'm using a cognitive heuristic anytime that I'm walking down the street and I see somebody, wearing the logo of the university that I work at. I assume that we've got some shared cultural heritage, right? We've got some shared interests, and I can talk to them about it. That's not always true. Sometimes they picked up, the college's logo at a yard sale or from a thrift store. But most of the time, assuming that they went to the college if they're wearing the shirt is accurate. That's a heuristic. That's a shortcut that I use. All right, we're getting to a point where you maybe want to skip the next couple of slides, depending on how familiar you are with this content, because we're going to talk about some things that you've already hit in probably an intro or a cognitive class, but specifically talk about them in context of social psych. So first, let's review some principles of learning. This is things like behaviorism, classical conditioning, operant conditioning. Let's talk about them in social psychology. Okay, do you want a treat? Oh, okay. Oh my God. So I was going to show you some learning about operant conditioning, but anyway, learning about operant conditioning is when you associate a behavior with some kind of reward or punishment. As you were supposed to see in that little video, Mississippi River understands that if she rings the bell, then she gets a treat. What I forgot before I started recording is that it doesn't matter how the bell gets rung. So sometimes she will intentionally, I can tell it's intentionally, she will knock it off the table so that it will ring so that she gets a treat. And then since I gave her a treat, she didn't want any more, so she just walked away. So anyway, just a reminder, operant conditioning is when a behavior increases or decreases due to the presence of a reward or punishment. In the case of Mississippi River, the behavior is ringing the bell. It's associated with a treat. But this can happen in social situations too. I think of the presence of a social cue that what you're doing is good or bad. Like somebody smiles at you or changes their body language to indicate that they either are enjoying your company or not enjoying your company. You respond unconsciously to that, to those cues, those rewards of body language, smiles, even somebody saying, you're funny, you told a joke, or you're being creepy. We respond to that, and operant conditioning is how your behavior is slowly shaped through those interactions. Social behavior can also change through associative learning or classical conditioning. The basic example back from your intro textbook would be Pavlov's dogs. It's when you associate an unconditioned stimuli becomes a conditioned stimuli. In the case of Pavlov's dogs, the original unconditioned stimulus and response pairing was that the presence of food led to salivation. Pavlov rung a bell every time food was presented, so eventually just ringing the bell would cause the dogs to salivate. Their brains had associated those events together. This, again, happens in social situations just as much as it occurs in the physical world. Finally, last reminder review is social learning. Social learning is when we pick up new behaviors by observing others and modeling their behavior. I think a lot about cognition, how our behavior changes, how we think about the world as top down versus bottom up. Bottom up is the building pieces of your behavior and cognitions. Top down is what starts in your brain, the existing notions that you have about the world, how they change your behavior. When we talk about schemas, we're talking about top down information. We're talking about information that you've already built, that's already in your brain, that informs your behavior. What are schemas? Well, schemas are patterns that you expect to see in the world. In a social psych class, we'll talk about social schemas. This is a relatively advanced thing for a brain to do. Humans have it. It appears to originate in our prefrontal cortex, but it's very difficult to find great evidence of this outside of base instinct in a lot of other animals. So a schema exists when you expect to see certain things in your environment. So I walk into a classroom and my social schema includes students sitting in the seats, an instructor standing at the front of the room, right? That's what I expect to see. That helps my brain prepare for what I'm likely to encounter in a social situation. I expect the social situation to be very different if 10 people walk into a bar together versus 10 people walk into a church together. It helps me behave appropriately if I know which schema to activate. Because obviously, acting the same way in both situations is usually inappropriate, sometimes harmful, depending on what you're thinking about. Schemas are not something that your brain just comes pre-equipped with like an instinct. It's something that your brain has to build. So we learn about the social world and our schemas adapt over time through the process of accommodation and assimilation. Accommodation is when existing schemas change with new information. You go to a new church with 10 people and you accommodate the new social information. People act differently here. Assimilation is a process in which our existing knowledge can influence the new conflicting information to better fit with our existing information. So you and 10 friends walk into a new bar, and assimilation is when you notice what patterns still hold from your previous experiences. I'm talking a lot about the physical environment. We know what a classroom is like, what a bar is like, but you're also using schemas about what you expect someone's behavior to be like. I know, for example, that if I am a Southern white male, and those are just three of many pieces of my identity, but people have existing social information in mind about what each of those categories is going to act like. I've asked classes in the past in person, tell me, like, what are some of your stereotypes, what are some of the expectations you have of any of those categories or all of those categories together. Some of them are funny, some of them are positive, some of them are negative, but they all have either some degree of accuracy or some origin. There's a reason you've got some negative stereotypes about certain groups. Whether they're true or false, they came from somewhere. Understanding that your schemas, your brain is constantly updating them with new information, helps us to understand where both the useful and the not so useful stereotypes come from. I want to give you one more look at schemas from a more modern source. This is actually from 2022, these researchers were looking at how existing schemas you have of the physical environment help drive your behavior in certain environments. It's really interesting. And one of the examples they gave of the type of pattern their study found, which is not from their study, but is an example from their lit review, is that if you are wanting to cook something, you need a pan. What they found is that your eyes will automatically scan an environment for metallic looking objects, but only if you have identified that environment as part of your kitchen. So if you want to cook something in a pan, your eyes will automatically scan your kitchen for metallic surfaces, but they won't automatically scan your bedroom for metallic surfaces. I think about stuff like this a lot when it comes to the social situation, because in essence, what this means is that if you're expecting to see certain things in certain environments, your brain will start scanning for them there. I think about the unconscious stereotypes I have about people. If I'm expecting a certain group of people to be irritable or violent or angry, I might unconsciously be scanning people's faces for signs of anger, signs of irritability, just because I'm expecting to see those emotions. And that might be true if I'm in a hostile situation and I'm looking for people that are hostile. But if I'm just in a neutral situation, that can lead to inaccurate judgments of people. One of the things that you need to keep in mind about your existing schemas is that all of them, good or bad, tend to resist being changed. For example, in one study of people looking for health information online, the researchers find that we tend to evaluate the health information we find online. We already are biased before we even look at a source of information online. In this study, for example, a sample of parents were asked about their beliefs about vaccines, and then they were given sources from online that gave information about vaccine efficacy. The researchers found that if you tend to trust vaccines and you get a list of resources about vaccine safety, your social cognition kind of pushes you toward being more interested in the headlines that agree with your existing beliefs. If you doubt vaccine safety and you get the same list, your social cognition kind of biases you toward finding the headlines that agree with you. Again, more appealing. You want to read about them more. So what people do is they tend to seek out information that confirms their existing schemas. Your brain is predisposing you to do that. So it doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong. Even if you have the correct belief, how do you know it's the correct belief? Because your brain is going to seek out information that just shows that you are correct. Whenever you seek out, there's two different things here. One is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you're looking for new information, you are biased toward only seeing the information that confirms your existing beliefs. And confirmation bias could also be used to, when you're trying to think of examples, it's easier for you to think of examples that already support your existing opinions. So in this article, for example, people that think that vaccines for children are not safe, your brain is literally more likely to see news stories that say vaccines aren't safe. You're more likely to think of quotes from scientists that say vaccine safety is not safe. Doesn't matter if that's a real reflection of the world or not. That's what you are more likely to seek out and remember. This can lead to the self-fulfilling prophecy is another term that you'll see in social psych, which is when you can kind of create a world based on your existing beliefs about the world. In this example, if you think that vaccines are safe, it is more easy for you to only ever see information about how vaccines are safe. If you think vaccines are dangerous, it's easy for you to create a world in which you only encounter information about how vaccines are dangerous because your brain is biasing you that way. I want to make sure to say before we move on from this example that overwhelmingly research supports that vaccines that are administered to the public are safe. So in today's day and age, I want to make sure to say that before moving on. There's controversy about that in the public. There's not a lot of controversy about that in the scientific world. The vaccines that are administered to the public are safe. All right. Right now, what I'm going to do is give you a few examples of some more examples of cognitive shortcuts. I tried to find pretty recent research using these shortcuts as well. I'm going to give some examples just from my own personal experience and others from recent studies. So let's get into it. All right. The first shortcut let's talk about is cognitive accessibility. This just refers to the fact that you have a lot of overlapping schemas. Some of them are going to be more accessible to you than others. I think about when other people look at you, you have multiple overlapping identities that are probably available for other people to see. Your hairstyle gives part of your identity away. Your skin color usually gives some of your ethnic or racial identity away. What you're wearing, all these things. What do you think other people notice? Depending on what you think other people notice first, it'll activate some stereotypes they have about you instead of others. This is cognitive accessibility. If I go home this afternoon from work and play video games, I'm more likely to get video games references in TV shows and books that I'm reading tomorrow because that stuff is just accessible in my brain. If I am hungry, I am more likely to pick up social information from other people about food and eating. Yes, I want to go out to eat tonight. All right, next cognitive process is salience. Salience just refers to if something is salient, that means it comes easily to mind. This is just referring to the fact that some stimuli at any given moment are more salient than other stimuli, so it's more or less likely to grab your attention. I wanted to give an example here of an animal that's very good at manipulating this the opposite direction, and that is the tiger. Now, when humans, most of us, see tigers, we see a very brightly colored orange and black striped animal. But what you got to understand, you might know this firsthand if you're colorblind, is that for many animals, because of their color receptors, a tiger is kind of wearing camo, just like a human hunter might be wearing camo. It tricks the visual system of its prey animals by wearing the same colors that they're used to seeing in their environment. It appears just like the forest background to other animals. What this means is their brains, their cognitive systems, are not picking up on deviations from the pattern of just looking out into the forest, so they don't notice the tiger until it's too late. Let's look at an academic study next. For the representativeness heuristic, the representativeness heuristic occurs when you make judgments based on how well an event matches your own expectations. So a new event happens in the world, and whether you judge that to be representative of typical events is based on kind of what you're already thinking of. I thought a great example of this came from some research from 2016 that was looking at how often people use the representativeness heuristic and their belief in conspiracy theories. And what the researchers found, among other things, you should read it if you're interested in conspiracy theories, is that people who rely more on the representativeness heuristic in their everyday thinking are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. Now, when I thought about this research, I thought, well, that makes sense, because people who believe in conspiracy theories, when they see a story on the internet that confirms the conspiracy theory, they're more likely to think that is representative of reality. When they see something that doesn't confirm their conspiracy theory, they're less likely to judge it as typical, right? That's the exception, not the rule. The rule is my conspiracy theory is accurate. Next, let's talk about the availability heuristic. This is the cognitive shortcut that you take where things that you can more easily think of, your brain kind of thinks those are more likely to happen in reality. I found a great example of this from researchers studying doctors practicing in the emergency room. What they found is that when physicians encounter a certain thing in their everyday life, for example, a doctor treats someone with a pulmonary embolism, they are more likely to see pulmonary embolisms in the few days following the original one. Now, does that mean, is there something about reality where when an ER doctor sees somebody with a pulmonary embolism, more people with a pulmonary embolism are more likely to come in and see that ER doctor? No, that's ridiculous. This isn't a soap opera or something. What's happening is a doctor is more likely to see it because they're thinking of it, because they had an experience of it. So they see it because of the bias, the availability heuristic, not because of a change in reality. The next cognitive process is labeled anchoring and adjustment. This is the shortcut that your brain takes where its first estimate of something tends to become an anchor that kind of prevents your estimate from going too far from that anchor. And I wanted to go with a real example that's happened to a lot of people, including me when I bought a car in the 2010s. So what will often happen is that what the car dealer wants you to do is to have a higher estimate of the car's value. So when you try to haggle for new features or a different financing plan, you've got that higher number in mind rather than the lower number. So you're more likely to overpay for things that you may not necessarily need. So what happened to me happens to a lot of people. The first number I get from the car dealership is the highest possible number they can come up with. So it adds all the features, it adds the most expensive insurance plan, it adds the most expensive financing. That way, when we are looking at the features of the car and I'm backing down on certain features, I'm backing down on spending more money, my brain is more likely to gravitate toward that first number as being the real value of the car. So even if the real value of the car is thousands of dollars off, my brain kind of sticks, it anchors to that first estimate. This is something you can take advantage of when you are bartering with someone. The next social bias is called counterfactual thinking. What counterfactual thinking is referring to is that you can replay or practice social situations in your head and kind of imagine your behavior leading to different outcomes. Where the bias comes in is that your brain has a hard time telling apart the actual way an event happened with you replaying the event thinking things turned out differently. So let's say that you imagine 10 different scenarios. One of them actually happened, but you imagine 10. One of them was real. Your brain has a hard time telling apart the 9 that didn't actually happen from the one that did. So this bias is that when you come up with counterfactuals, which is coming up with these scenarios that could have went a little differently, your brain treats them like they actually happened, kind of. Now, I found a very interesting practical study from this team in Britain where they actually used this to their advantage. They recruited people who are college students for their sample, and they measured their drinking behavior, had them do an intervention, and then measured their intention to engage in problem drinking behaviors in the future. So not just drinking casually, but drinking to excess, binge drinking, and so on. And their intervention was they had people imagine all the bad things that could happen if they engaged in binge drinking, if they drank way too much than they intended to. So they had them engage in counterfactual thinking. And what they found is that when you had people imagine all the bad things that could happen if they drank way too much, they intended to drink less when they go out drinking the next time. So imagine all the bad things that'll happen to you if you go out and drink too much. Please don't do it. All right. Next is the false consensus bias. And this is one of the most important ones, I think, which is we tend to see other people as more similar to us than they actually are. We also tend to look for opinions other people have that agree with our own opinions and see those as the consensus, see those as the group average. So I found some research. This team at Yale performed 4 different experiments that all found similar results. I'm going to make up these numbers, but this is kind of a summary of 4 different studies. People treat 1 out of 5 primary sources agreeing and 5 out of 5 primary sources agreeing pretty much the same. So in their research, they found that if you looked at 5 news stories and all 5 of them had the same opinion, people came away thinking, well, it looked like everybody agreed. But if they read 5 news headlines and only one of them had the opinion, people also went away thinking, well, everybody had that same opinion. What is going on here? People have a hard time telling a true consensus among experts from a false consensus among experts. This is especially true when you read something that matches your own personal beliefs. So the next time, let's say that you are a hardcore Android fan or you're a hardcore Apple fan. So you go and read reviews before you buy a new phone. If you are an Apple fan and you read one news story about how great Apple is, your brain kind of looks at it and says, well, everybody tends to agree that Apple is the best. But if you're a hardcore Android fan and you read one review that says the newest Android phone is great, your brain says, okay, we don't have to read anymore. Everybody agrees that Android is the best. What was kind of most dangerous to me reading this study is that the researchers in one of their experiments, they explicitly told people, hey, there's this thing, it's the false consensus bias. We want you to know about it. Now go do the study. Even people that they informed about the false consensus effect still fell prey to the false consensus bias. That is kind of the scariest thing in that study to me. All right, next cognitive shortcut. This is overconfidence. This is the finding that consistently people tend to have more confidence in their own skills and abilities than what we might objectively expect. And there was a ton of research for me to pick from when I was looking for some examples of this. But one I found really interesting is this Ghanaian team at the Applied Finance and Policy Management Department. So not a psychology department. They're finding similar findings to us at the University of Education, Winneba in Ghana. They found levels of confidence that were not warranted by actual performance of people making stock market investments during the pandemic. So the stock market during the pandemic, just like it does at other points in history, has a lot of volatility, goes a lot of up and down, people making a lot of bad bets in the stock market. What they found is that people's confidence in their ability to make good stock market decisions was way higher than their actual ability to make good stock market decisions. Ugh. All right. We're going to end with the examples there. We're almost done with the presentation, but this is kind of a worldwide tour of psychologists and even people from other areas outside of psychology finding consistently that humans are intensely biased in all different areas of life. Whether you're an expert like a doctor or investing in the stock market, or you're an everyday person who just wants to research things online, you are biased by your existing schemas, the existing view you have of the world. For our last topic in social cognition, we're going to go back to one of those tools of social psychology, which is that the behavior is a function of person variables and situation variables. I'm going to talk about making a dispositional inference about someone's behavior versus making a situational inference about someone's behavior. Before I explain those vocabulary words, I want you to imagine a scenario. You have an acquaintance, Thomas. They attended a party and got in a fight. Now, without knowing any other information, I want you to try to imagine for me for a second. What is the reason you think that Thomas got into a fight? Why might someone get into a fight? You could probably come up with a lot of different explanations. The point I'm making here is that those explanations you're coming up with can fall into two broad categories. Explanations related to that person's personality traits or the situation that they were in, something that happened to them. Examples of dispositional attributions would be things about that person's personality. Thomas got in a fight because he's an aggressive person. If that's how you explain the behavior, you're making a dispositional attribution. If you believe Thomas got in a fight because Thomas was intoxicated, that's why he got in a fight. That is a situational attribution. Being drunk isn't part of his personality. It's something that happened to him. It's the situation that he's in. So dispositional attributions, something about their personality. Situational attributions, something about the situation that they're in. Is one of these explanations true and the other false? Well, in this hypothetical example I'm coming up with, we don't know which of these is true, but in real life, neither of these is ever going to be true, because what I want us to start thinking about is that it's always, someone's behavior is always a combination of their personality mixing with the environment that they're in. So dispositional attributions, situational attributions are always correct, but they're never the full situation. There's always more to any story. So the next time that you're trying to imagine to yourself, why did that person engage in that behavior? Whether you're reading a book, you're watching the latest TV show, or you're out with your friends, I want you to try to kind of force your brain into thinking about both a situational and dispositional reason for the behavior happening, and see if you can kind of think about how those things interact. All right, takeaway lesson from this topic of social cognition is that think about how your brain is doing this analysis hidden from you. It's usually doing all the analyses that we're talking about. It's engaging in all the biases that we've talked about completely under the radar for most people. Try over the next few days. Just catching your brain engaging in these shortcuts. That's a good challenge.